Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another tutorial. Today we'll be talking about how I remade Nurko's track called Faith with Dia Frampton. Let's get right into it. And also, if you're interested in purchasing this project file, you're welcome to go check out my Gumroad page, which I will leave the link in the description below. Click that link and then click buy now, and then you can get this whole entire project file. Alright, so first off, let's go ahead and just start with the drums. Pretty basic stuff. You just have your kick here, kind of like a top-ish kick and a body, more body kick. So that's your top kick, and there's the body. Something quite punchy, so that way it can punch through the mix. A lot of my students, I noticed, a lot of their kicks just aren't thumpy enough, or just don't have enough power to punch through that mix. So having a kick that's just really thumpy in a way, or something as similar quality as this, is quite essential in these like big wall sound drops. And then I tried to recreate something that was similar to Nurko snare that has some type of like a tonal type of quality to it. So this is kind of like your tailish, snappyish layer. More of your like transient layer. And this is generally how I would go about layering snares as well. Sometimes I even layered up to 6 layers, and it worked out really well as well. It just kind of depends on what your snare currently needs, and because sometimes 2 tails might start clashing in frequencies with each other. But there's times where I layered 2 tails together, but they were covering kind of like a different frequency spectrum, or we're doing 2 different functions that it just sounded really well together. So when you're layering your snares, I would say kind of like look through your samples, find something that you may think may sound good, throw it on with whatever other snare layer that you have, and then try playing it in context, and that's how you're really going to know if that sample that you liked is going to work with the rest of the other samples that you're trying to layer your snare with. But yeah, going back to the layering, so this is kind of like your transient layer. This is kind of like just some kind of general basic principles on how I would layer my snares, essentially kind of like your transient layer, like a body layer and a tail, and then after kind of layering the fundamentals, then I'll kind of figure out what other frequency spectrums the snare might need to make it sound more full so it can punch through the mix, essentially. Because you also, on top of the kick, you also really need like a really big snare for these type of big wall sound drops too, just to have it punch through the mix. And then this one right here is kind of like your tonal layer. I was trying to get as close as possible to Nurko's snare, and it also kind of had like this tonal layer to it. And then also kind of faded in some of the transients as well, because it's going to clash with the other transients that we have. So that's something that I sometimes do as well. And then this exhaust is basically just covering the high end of the snare. Yeah, so just really filling in that like high end area of the frequency spectrum. Just some basic EQ, just boosting the highs as well. And then yeah, basically in Nurko's track Faith, he also had this like ride pattern, kind of like trappy-ish hats and stuff. And then yeah, these are just some fills that happened during the drop. All right, and the next step we have the chord stack. This is a sub here. Just basically some like maximal sub, some kick type, saturation knob on it. It's basically just to bring out the sub, because without those, the sub is just not going to sound as beefy. And actually kick type was something that Nurko also showed me as well during one of our coaching sessions a few years ago. And it's just a really great way to beef up that sub. And I've pretty much used kick tight for almost all my subs recently on all the tracks that I'm working on. And if you don't have kick tight, because this is actually a Ableton Suite native plugin, you can always just use like the standard saturator on Ableton, which works just fine. And you can kind of mess with like the I'll just throw on this real quick so I can show you a quick example. But yeah, if I were to use a saturator, I would basically just play it in context of the mix. I might do analog clip or soft sign. Soft sign is something I like to use sometimes. Play with the drive until it sounds good in context. Obviously not cranking it too much where the sub just sounds too distorted. Enabling soft clip, and then lowering the output as well to taste, because when you crank the drive, it becomes louder. So that's pretty much how I would use a saturator on my sub. Although I still prefer kick type because it just gives them a much nicer sound to it. So I've been using kick type more often recently. And then these are the mid basses. Here's the first one. And then the second one. And then I'll show you what these are. It's really basic, just like one EQ. Yeah, it's just like preset. Literally, that's about it. And then for the next bass, unfreeze it. I think this one's from the Brighter Days sample pack as well as the first one, if I remember correctly. But this is the second one, what it sounds like. Really basic stuff. And then this vinyl distortion gives it some movement and actually brings up more of the frequencies as well. Yeah. So quite essential to have this on, just to bring up the frequencies, to again add more movement and just make the bass sound a lot bigger. And then after that, just like a basic EQ. And then next up are the chords. As you may notice, all the chords are playing the lead notes as well. Because if you don't do that, it's just not going to punch through the mix as much. And it's also situational as well, because there's times where I haven't done that. So it just kind of depends. If you want to bring out the leads more prominent in the mix, or feel like they could be more prominent, then essentially just having the saw stack layers play the notes will help that out a lot. So the first layer is, this is all really basic standard stuff here. So the first layer is probably just like your detune saw. Yeah, you know, 8 saw waves, 7 on the other side. Nothing. Some pretty basic distortion and just some EQ. And then the second saw is probably your higher octave saw, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So pretty standard stuff. More detune on the higher octave saw. Has a square wave. And then EQ again. And then on both the saws together, because this is actually instrument rack, so the processing going on to both of these saws is just your basic OTT, just kind of cranking it, turning up the gain, and then a basic EQ, cutting out the highs, dipping out a resonant frequency on the higher end, and that's literally it. The second saw is going to be a bit more interesting. That's kind of like what adds the mids of the drop. So very mid-heavy super saw. It's actually something that Nurko also showed me as well when we were having our coaching sessions, again, years ago, was that on one of my drops, actually one of my first tracks released called Can't Let You Go, more of a progressive house track kind of fused with future bass. But one of the things that Nurko showed me was that I had the basic layers of a saw stack, and just in case that you don't know what the basic layers of a saw stack are, in general what I would start with is, again, just like your standard less detune layer, pretty basic like saw shapes, and then a more detune layer, and then your higher octave saw. So that's kind of like what I originally had in the track. And then Nurko felt that I was kind of missing some mids in the track, which I actually do a lot now with my drops, where not only will I have like the 3 basic saw layers, but I also have like a layer that kind of covers those mid frequencies, only if it's needed though. So in this case, I opted to use a super saw, which sounds like this again. And this is actually just the Culture Code super saw from his free pack on his Discord. Again, really basic, just again saw waves, some white noise, distortion, really basic stuff here. And then a standard EQ, again, just cutting out the low cut and the highs. The vocoder is actually making it more mid-heavy, so this is what the vocoder is doing. Yeah, just to emphasize those mids, basically. A little bit of stereo width, some more output. And then, yeah, just some basic EQing just to get rid of some of those frequencies that are kind of clogging up the mix, essentially. The lower end and as well as the higher end. So yeah, kind of playing the drop in context without the super saw, you'll find that it's actually gonna be needed to make that like big wall sound drops. So that's without it, and then with it on. So yeah, quite essential if you want to fill out your drops. And then the third layer here is just like a super detuned layer, if I remember correctly as well. Yeah. And this one's also from the free pack that I was referring to from Culture Code as well. Yeah. This one, sometimes you use it as a higher octave saw. But yeah, just a lot more on the detuned side. And again, literally the same kind of idea, really basic, some hyperdimension, distortion, chorus, and all that stuff. And yeah, EQ, again, just cutting out some of the highs and then cutting out some of the lows. All right, and then let's get to the leads. All right, and then here's the first layer. And I don't think I'm gonna unfreeze everything because these omnispheres are gonna make my computer lag like crazy. So I'm only probably gonna unfreeze some of them, the ones that are doable, but I can't do them all. So this is like weightless wisps. Some decapitator and really basic reverb. And then here you have a more like airy-ish kind of quality lead. Same idea with the processing, some OTT as well, and a basic EQ. And then next up is this Nexus patch, which is basically the freaking sauce of this drop. It's basically just adds like a lot of airiness to the drop, and this is what it kind of sounds like together in context. Without it. And then with it. So like this freaking lead is just like essential in this type of Nurko style drop because it just adds that like really nice airiness to it. And then I'll kind of show you the rest of these leads of what they're doing. So this one again, without it, it's just not going to sound as full. Missing a little bit of that airiness in it again. Kind of fills out the frequency spectrum as well. And this one fills out the higher end of the frequency spectrum. And this Nexus patch is a preset called Orchid Drops. All right. And then the next lead is a lead also in Culture Code's free sample pack. It's a square lead, also very essential in these type of style drops. And then just some basic reverb again. Basic EQs, cutting out the lows, and then some more resonant frequency EQs at the higher end, and I'll show you the function of this lead as well. So that's without the square lead and then with the square lead. Very essential to fill out your drops and especially that lead frequency spectrum. And then next up, this is like a more mid-heavy lead because without it, there just wasn't enough body, so completely missing now, and then with it back on. Fills out that whole entire frequency spectrum. So as you may have noticed, pretty much everything in this drop and just drops in general of how to make them kind of sound full and not muddy is that all your frequencies or all your layers are doing different functions, because you can have like 8 super saws, but if they're all doing the same thing, it's just going to clog up your mix. So one key tip that I could give is that when you're layering your drop stacks, for the most part, most of your layers are going to be supporting with each other and having different functions rather than doing the same thing and just basically, clogging up your mix. So, so that's something to look out for when you're stacking your layers. But yeah, this preset is also another preset. It's like the Sly Lead 2. That's what it sounds like by itself. So you can hear that's just really mid-heavy, and it was just something really needed just to fill out that frequency spectrum, and then just your basic EQ. And then next is the atmospheres, which are also extremely essential in your drops. So this is without the atmospheres. The whole entire high end of the frequency spectrum is just missing. So this is like the main one that creates all the high end effect on it, which is also from the Nurko Atmosphere Sample Pack. Really basic EQ, and then just rolling off some of the highs. Because if we didn't do that, then the highs are just going to start clashing with your crashes or whatever high-end elements you also have in drop. This is another atmosphere here. Pan to the right, and then this one's pan to the left. Basic EQs again, and then this fab filter here to also remove some of that body layer because it's going to start clashing if this fab filter wasn't there. Also a dynamic EQ doing the same idea as well. Much cleaner in the mix too once we did that. So, and then you just have your basic white noise layer. It's literally just a sine layer turned on with the white noise and your basic EQ essentially. You may have noticed the utilities; those are just automations to turn off when the fills come in. So, and the next step we just have this effects tab. This is this impact just to kind of emphasize on that fill essentially. And these are just basically some growls for the fills. Again, if you want to like fully dive deep into the project, you're welcome to purchase the project file on my Gumroad. Again, the link will be in the description below. Yeah, and I think that is going to be it for this project file. So yeah, guys, hope this tutorial was helpful. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed this tutorial, and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't yet, and also hit the bell notification symbol so you know when my next video goes live. And also I'm offering one-on-one coaching sessions, so if you're interested in taking a coaching session with me, you're welcome to go to my Patreon and support the coaching tier on there, as well as I also offer feedback tier on the Patreon too. So if you want feedback from me on your tracks, you're welcome to pledge for that tier as well. And if you're interested in purchasing coaching sessions in like a bundle, you're welcome to email me, and I'll also leave my email in the description below as well. All right, guys, thanks so much again for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, much love. Peace.